How many of you would consider yourself solution or software architects? Oh, wow, that's a really strong group. All right, how many of you would consider yourself enterprise or business or information architects? All right, that's pretty good showing, really. How many of you are primarily engaged with the operationalization of IT, keeping things running and making sure they actually work? Very solid. How many of you would consider yourselves to be not in IT, but in the business? Good. So I can insult the business all I want. All right, super. All right, well, there's supposed to be some kind of podcast, so I'm waiting for the cue, and when that happens. That's a go? All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. As I mentioned just a minute ago, my name is Nick Malik. I'm a member of the Microsoft Services Organization in the United States in the Pacific Northwest, and flew down to do some presentations in business architecture. I write a blog on the MSDN site called Inside Architecture. It's fairly easy to get access to. You can just honestly Bing my name. Yes, I do use the word Bing as a verb. Tells you I'm a Microsoftie. This is more of a how-to session than my prior session. My prior talk was much more about kind of what is business architecture and how would you work with one. I'm going to talk, this is much more step-by-step. It's a little bit high level in one sense because I'm going to describe a process that would normally take months to do, and I'm going to do it in an hour. That said, and I've also generalized a lot of the details. So I'll dive into a little more of the details that aren't on the deck. But if you have a question, go ahead and interrupt me, raise your hand. I do like to hear questions, do like to share ideas amongst the folks in the room. So the ROI, I like having an attendee ROI slide. I'm going to talk about how to recognize the drivers for alignment, how to produce a capability hierarchy that's business appropriate. That's actually tougher than it sounds. Producing heat maps for capabilities. And what do you do with all this stuff? I mean, what is a capability? And why would anybody care? By the way, if you're in an organization and you bring up the word capability to a person who's very, very process focused, expect to get kicked out of the room. There's not a lot of love lost between these two different communities in the business architecture space. There is a way around it, and I'll talk a little bit about that. What is business alignment? I did have a slide in the other presentation on what is business alignment, and kind of just talked about it as you do what you say you will do. But there's something more to it, and this talk is really very specifically about making sure that things align. And the talk is titled Aligning IT to the Business. It's a technical description because we don't align IT to the business. IT is the business. It's part of the business. You can't align a part of the business to another part of the business without making yourself so IT-centric that you waste everybody's time. You're not aligning IT to the business. You're aligning the business to the business. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that actually plays out. That said, traditionally, at least, business architecture tends to get practiced from an IT perspective. I don't think that's the right approach. That's the historic approach. And we're going to talk about how does that expand? How does that shift? Over the next few decades, we're seeing a great deal of shifting already of how business architecture approaches the problem. So my Einstein quote here is intentional. Change is hard. And if you offer somebody an opportunity to change, they won't. My father was a college professor, so he would teach students all the time. And one of his favorite sayings, and one that I didn't realize was actually useful until long after I was no longer living at home, was change is the toughest thing you'll ever ask somebody to do, other than one other thing, asking them to think. All right? So if you want someone to change, don't ask him to think, and if you want someone to think, don't ask him to change. So it's an interesting way of putting it in your head. How do you get change to happen if you have to make people think? Give them a very simple, very easy roadmap to follow, make them want it, build demand, and you might be able to get some changes to happen. So realize that in many, many, many important ways, alignment is about change. It's about changing the way people do things. How many of you think it should be easy to get business folks to do what their leaders say they will do? How many think it should be easy? Should be easy. How many have ever found it to be easy? Okay. So I'm going to give an actual example. Notice the year. Dell's diversification strategy, 2010. This is when it was announced, and it was actually, well, about a year and a half after it was announced. They're going to go after diversification. They're going to go after a broader number of segments, not be so dependent upon the retail PC market, okay? And it was already being criticized in well-known publications. Notice the year. It's hard. It's hard to get an organization to change. It's hard to get someone to pivot and turn around and try to do something different. But this is the cost of not changing in time. You can set a strategy, but then if you change the organization quickly, maybe your strategy will succeed. The strategy was announced in 2008. It's 2012, and they're not there. Why does it take 4 years? It's hard. There's a lot of parts, a lot of moving parts to being able to change a strategy, being able to rewrite a business model, to being able to do something big. In this case, they weren't even being particularly innovative. For those of you who heard me last talk about innovation, they weren't being particularly innovative. They were copying more than one business model. They wanted to expand their number of business models. So it should have been easy. It isn't. So I'm going to give you that step-by-step approach. Now this little shape, it's kind of like a sideways Y. I'm going to use it over and over and over again. So as we go through the rest of the slides, you'll see it in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll be highlighting the portion of this process I'm talking about. It's a generalization. This is the cool thing about business architecture. You can take almost anything and generalize it to the point where it's almost useless. The hard thing about following along with that we'll talk about, I'll have to do the two portions of the why until we get to that intersecting point where we start talking about drivers and capabilities together. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me. I'm going to give you the numbers. That's the order I'm going to talk about it in. All right. All right. So I did talk a little bit about business models in the last talk, and I gave a little excerpt from my enterprise business motivation model. The enterprise business motivation model, I will now use the term EBMM and assume that you know what the hell I'm talking about, is an open source meta model for business architecture. It's been on the internet for a number of years. It's now up to version 3.5. That's just because I haven't published version 3.8 yet. It's very easy to get access to, and I will refer to it every now and then. If you want to surf over to it, I do suggest it's a good way of understanding what are the concepts around business architecture and how we look at modeling a business. But understanding what your business models are, and the whole metaphor of people running in a race is that your organization really is running in a race, but it's running with individuals. And it's not just the individual people, it's the individual business models for your organization. Now, when I say business models, please forgive my use of the word business. If you're not in a business, if you're in a government organization or a nonprofit or in military or civil defense, et cetera, you may not use the word business very much. There isn't really a good word that has been produced that refers to the non-commercial aspects. So when I say business, just hear organizational for those of you who are not in a commercial setting. But you have to know how many that you have. You have to know how many businesses that you're in. So the very first step, really, is to understand how many businesses you're in. And it's amazing how many people will skip the step. How many of you have read or seen some discussion of business architecture that says it starts with strategy? How many of you have ever seen something along those lines? It starts with strategy. Yeah, strategy of what? If you don't know what your business models are, you don't know which business model that strategy applies to. Strategies do not apply to the entire organization. A strategy that applies to an entire organization isn't a strategy, it's a goal. It's often a performance goal. So in my prior talk I mentioned Air New Zealand wants to increase profitability by $175 million a year by 2015. That's a performance goal, that's not a strategy. Let's achieve that. How? Well, I'm not going to answer that. How is the strategy part? Okay, now why? Why do we want to be more profitable? For the people who are shareholders, it's kind of cool to be profitable. If we could get Mark Zuckerberg to understand that. I was one of the idiots who bought shares in Facebook. Why do I regret that? Never ever take my investment advice, by the way. So understanding the business models actually addresses one of the key questions of an organization is why you're there. If the company doesn't have a mission and vision, they haven't really thought about why they're there. If they have a mission and vision and ignore it, how many of you have ever worked for an organization that has a mission and vision and really ignores it? Okay, I have. I'm not including my current company. But the reality is that you can understand where a company really is going by just looking at what they did. One of the key challenges I've seen with business architects is they'll say, well, I don't have access to the key stakeholders. I can't go talk to the CEO. And some companies, that's normal. I have never had a one-on-one meeting with Steve Ballmer. 10 minutes of his time would be worth more than my salary. I did not expose hope too much about how little I'm paid. The challenge, though, is that I can understand a lot about what he wants by looking at what he does. And you can understand a lot about a business and what they believe they are by looking at what their business models are. Okay, don't just look at the ones that appear obvious. In my earlier talk, I talked about Air New Zealand as my example. 9 different business models. The 4 obvious ones were 3 different passenger models and 1 cargo. So what about the other 5? But if you look at what they actually do, you can understand a lot more about the company. The company really is more about using the assets they have to make money as much as they can, which explains that business goal of being more profitable. It's a financial investment instrument. It just also happens to be an airline. You can understand a lot about a company by looking at the number of business models they have. And that's a very key thing that a business architect has to start with. If you say, what is my strategy, you have to know what is my strategy to do what? For which of those businesses do I have a strategy? So if the profitability goal is great, but for passenger airline, a strategy might be more about how I'm going to make more passengers come. How am I going to get more customers? How am I going to broaden my market? How am I going to compete successfully against one of the competitors, Qantas or Virgin or whatever, is coming in and flying against Air New Zealand, which was the example I used earlier. Let's assume a smaller example for a moment. How about a coffee shop? Small restaurant, coffee shop. Maybe they serve a little bit of biscuits and danishes. Okay. So what is their business model? What is the business model? How would you describe the business model of a small coffee shop that is right on the street corner, maybe across the street from a Starbucks, which is, it's a well-known brand of a coffee shop? How would you describe the business model of a coffee shop? So who are the customers? Hands? Who's the customers for a coffee shop? Can't hear? The locals, the people who are, and now is it all locals? Is it everybody in the city? People who, tourists, I heard, people who are drinking coffee. Sorry? I think the interesting thing I'm looking for, though, is it's people who are nearby the coffee shop. Do you drive to a coffee shop? If it's really good, okay. That says a lot, though, doesn't it? If the value proposition is compelling, you'll go out of your way, right? But for most of the bulk of their business, it's going to be opportunistic. So your location matters, as in all restaurant and food service businesses, location, right? So if you think about the business model of that coffee shop, it is providing a product. It's retail, providing a product in exchange for a little bit of money. And that, now I ask you something. What is the reason, what is the value proposition of a good coffee shop? Is it good coffee? Good experience. Good experience. Nobody spends $7 for a coffee if it's just good coffee. It's good experience. Okay? And Starbucks has made a fortune on this, but if they made good coffee, now that would be a different problem. The experience is really what drives that, and that's where the value proposition comes. And the reason I said I talk about being local and it being convenient, this is the reason why 2 Starbucks can be across the street from one another, and in many cities they are. There can be quite a few cities that have 50 or 60 Starbucks in them, very, very close to each other, and yet they're not really stealing from each other the business, because it's what's convenient. If it's literally on my side of the road, it's more convenient than crossing the street. So this is a big part of the business model. So understanding what business models you're in, if you're in the business model of selling coffee, your value proposition includes the products you sell, the services, but it also talks about your customers, your segment that you're going after, and what is appealing to them. Because if it's not appealing to them, they're not going to walk in the door. And it's not about the coffee. Okay? So when I talk about what's in a business model, I do refer, as I mentioned here, to motivation model. It is a derivation of Alexander Osterwalder's work, Business Model Generation. I have modeled it, though. It is more of an enterprise architecture model. It is not the business model canvas, which is a great tool for getting people to talk and think and brainstorm, and I dare you to capture the data in that in a useful way. It's tough. So I've done some modeling. But not all business models are equal. So in most organizations, you'll get many business models. They're not all equal. Some of them are more important. And the answer of why one model is more important than another is the key to understanding which strategy is more important than another strategy. Is understanding why one business model is more important than another. And I'm going to use another example. So let's say we're in our little coffee shop, and we're offering coffee and danishes to our customers, right? Maybe we decide that we're going to have additional business service that we're going to add. Maybe we're going to host meetings. We've got a little room in the back, okay? And we want to host meetings, get community people to come in for those meetings. It's a great way to sell some coffee, right? Is hosting meetings the same business model as selling coffee? How many of you think it is the same business model? Good. You just did that for fun. All right, it isn't really. You've got a different audience. People who need meeting space are groups, organizations, companies. Individuals are the people who walk into coffee shops. So now you've got a different customer base that you've got to reach. You've got a different product. You have a different method for connecting with those customers. Now I actually have to advertise wider in order to find people who will come to my coffee shop to use that meeting service. Okay. So it's very important to know when I say what is the strategy, am I going to increase the number of coffee sales? Okay. Hosting meetings may or may not support that strategy. Is the real strategy to make the experience of a community? Now you go back to what is the mission and vision of the organization. Are we in business to sell coffee, or are we in business to build community? And that's the key challenge of the business architect. You can't frame the strategy without knowing the business models. You really can't do it. So step 2 is surveying those strategic drivers. What are the strategies? As I mentioned before, strategy is always tied to one, possibly more than one business model. When it ties to more than one business model, it's usually because you've got something in common between these two business models. Meetings and selling coffee maybe not so much in common, but selling danishes and selling coffee do have something in common. They're dealing with the same people. It's 2 different products. Well, if I'm going to improve the customer service at the point of order, it's going to affect both those business models. That would be a strategy. Let's improve our customer service at the point of order. I want people to be cheerful. I want them to be well-trained and happy. If I have happy baristas, then maybe I'll have happier customers. They want to be there. That is a strategy. Making people happy is a tough one, but it's a strategy. Okay. Is a strategy different than a mission statement? Tell me what a mission statement accomplishes in a company. By the way, has anybody got a good answer for that? That's actually kind of a dumb question. What does a mission statement accomplish in a company? Any good ideas? I heard a voice. Sorry?
It motivates people?
Motivates people. It does. It's useful for alignment. It's useful but it's very individual, isn't it? If I know the mission statement of my organization, I know whether or not what I'm doing is any good. I don't know whether or not what you're doing is any good. It's truth, right? That said, it's not really a measurable thing. I can't come back and say, have I achieved it? Right? I like to poke at Google's first do no evil, right? Motto, I guess, is probably a better word for that. How do you know when you're done? You don't. You're never done. But a strategy, you're done. It has to have an end date. It has to have a measurable goal. So, no, they're not the same. But our strategy is performance goals. If the performance goal is increase profitability by $175 million a year by 2015, picking on Air New Zealand again, okay? Is that a strategy? How? Strategy has to answer some of the how question. It can't just be the goal. It has to be the how. If I'm going to walk from Auckland to Wellington, I can say I'm going to do that. Good goal. Let's get there. When? How? Those are very important questions. Because you really can't understand the question of how am I going to make my customer happier, how am I going to increase my profitability, how am I going to reduce my costs with just the goal. The goal supports that. But the strategy is answering some of the question, not all of it, but some of the question how. So when you're going to prioritize the strategies, and you have to be able to do that, you have to be able to put them in a stack order and say, this one is literally more important than that one. What are the things that you'll consider? I've got a little list up there. It's not a perfect list, and every company will use a different list, to be completely fair, and they'll put them in different order. If your company is primarily a financial instrument that also happens to fly passengers around the world rather well, then maybe return on investment is a pretty high one. I've seen return on investment used a lot. On the other hand, if your company is an innovation company, we've seen this with a lot of software and technology firms, they're primarily focused more on innovation and offering a unique product, return on investment might not be the best one to put on top. You're probably going to look more for improving customer service or increasing your market size. Okay? So by creating that tax, how do you create that hierarchy? How do you know which one of those things is more important? It depends on which one of your business models is more important. And now you can answer the question. You've got a list of business models. You can answer the question, which business model is important? It's not always an obvious reason why. So if I say that the two business models in my organization, one is really, really, really important because it makes a lot of money. Yeah, we don't want to piss off our existing customers. Another one's really, really, really important. It makes absolutely no money at all. Wow, does that make sense? Yes, it does. And the example I used earlier, and I'll use it again just for those folks who are new, Microsoft has Bing. How many of you use Bing, by the way, as your search engine? Good. Good smattering. Thank you for lying for me. All right. The interesting thing, actually, it's not a complete lie. 30% of the internet searches actually take place over Bing. It's largely because we bought that from Yahoo. But the twist to that is, how much money does Bing make for Microsoft? If any of you actually looked at our quarterly reports, you'll know the answer. It's a goose egg. We lose money on Bing. Is it an important business model to the company? Absolutely yes. So the strategies attached to Bing roll up higher on that list of priorities. Does it make money? No, nowhere near as much as Windows does. God, wouldn't that be great? Okay, so what makes something important can be emotional. It can be far-sighted. It can be thoughtful. It could be knee-jerk. It's going to depend upon the leaders at that point. Is that art or science? It's kind of where art meets science, isn't it? It's kind of sociology, I think. So other things that might be good considerations, impact on brand loyalty. For your coffee shop, the quality of the coffee does matter, because if somebody cares about the quality of the coffee and you give them really, really rotten coffee, they might not come back. Even if you give them good coffee, but you don't give it to them with a smile, they might be tempted to go to the coffee shop across the street. Those little details make a huge difference on loyalty. And that can be a business change, retraining your staff to be more friendly, like as I mentioned before. Impact on brand perception. If I'm going to release a product, is that going to increase my brand perception? Is it going to increase the brand value of my brands? Risk reduction. This is very important in many organizations and drives as one of the reasons why a number of my projects succeeded is because I reduce risk. Is it something sexy? Risk reduction is not sexy. Gee, what are we going to do if that volcano down the street erupts? Microsoft is in the shadow of a volcano. I know you guys understand about volcanoes better than we do. But the reality is that Microsoft lives in the shadow of a dormant, not dead volcano. And what if it goes? What would happen? 2 of our data centers are directly downstream. Yeah. One of them runs all SAP services. So, you have to really start thinking to yourself, business continuity is a big deal. So, risk reduction is a good reason, but is it strategic? It is if the business understands it to be. So, making something strategic can be a matter of getting your senior execs to put it on that list of important and connecting it to a business model. What would happen to your business? What would happen to the organization if you lost SAP for 6 weeks? That's an interesting question. What would happen if you only lost it for 4 hours? Totally different question. Okay. So surveying your strategic drivers, putting them in priority is very, very important. And so that's really step 2. And that, like I said, it attaches to your business models. I'm going to jump to the other end of the Y. I'm going to talk about capability models. How many of you have produced a capability model? Okay. Oh, that's actually pretty good. How many of you have used or been part of using a capability model? Okay, about the same group. It's not a widely used thing. A capability model is really a way of listing things out. It's basically a hierarchical list. Nothing fancy about a capability model. The diagram up there is actually a capability model that I produced. I was the enterprise architect. The business architect was a good friend of mine. I trained her. It is blurry on purpose. Even if you got the slide deck and expand, I'm not sure you'd be able to read very much of it. And it is specific to one area of the business, actually a set of business concerns. This particular capability model is specific to e-commerce. It's actually a pretty generic one, and if you needed something for e-commerce, there's nothing wrong with using it, okay? The cool thing about where do I get a capability model, and I get this question every now and then. Send it to me, they'll send it to me on my blog, they'll send it to, they'll put some note up on LinkedIn. Where do I get a capability model for just in general, or something for the airline business, or something for the manufacturing, we make widgets, we make steel parts, whatever. Something for retailers. The cool thing is at the high level, a capability model is a grouping of things that are just kind of useful to put together in your head. Why? And here comes the fun part. Why do we group the things in those groups? What makes those groups compelling? What makes them naturally come together and we think, gee, business intelligence is kind of a group of capabilities? Why is that a natural group as opposed to spattering those things all around sales and marketing and customer service? Because there's something in common. What is in common that brings together these taxonomies? Anybody can venture a guess? This was actually a revelation for me a few years ago when I ran across it. Anybody any venture a guess what brings capabilities together into groups? The information. The information that sits under them. It's the information that they share that brings them together. And why do they share that information? Because there's some process somewhere that needs that information in a consistent way. That's what brings capabilities together in their groups. What brings processes together in their groups? If I want to make groups of processes, so if by the way, to me, a business process has a beginning and an end and a series of activities. Is everybody okay with that definition of a business process? Very, very loose, but it's got a beginning and an end and a series of activities. Are you okay with that? Any objections? I'm going to throw any tomatoes at me? Darn, I was looking forward to the tomatoes. Okay, the twist that I want to ask you now is, have you ever heard of a process called order to cash? It's actually the one everyone quotes. Is that a process? Does it have a beginning and an end and a series of activities? It's a group of processes. And sometimes parallel processes. If you have more than one business model, you might have more than one order to cash. but you probably will. That's where you tend to be working directly with your customer at a very key portion of the process, the sales process, okay? So it's a group of processes. What brings together the group? What brings together that group? The information. Okay, information and time. Okay, so I've got a pile of things that come together because of information. I've got another pile of things that come together from information. What's the difference between a process hierarchy and a capability hierarchy? Nothing. Not much. At the highest level, and on this diagram I would say at the level of the gray boxes, there really isn't much difference. So you need a capability hierarchy, go get yourself a process hierarchy. Relabel it a little bit and go from there. Change the words around a little bit. You might not even do that. If your company's very process focused, don't even bother with a capability hierarchy. Use a process hierarchy and call it a process hierarchy, and then just use it the same way you would a capability hierarchy. The whole point of a capability hierarchy is it's just a list of things that you can tie ideas to. The list doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of success. So if you've built a hierarchy of process or a hierarchy of capabilities in your organization, you'll understand what I'm about to say. One of the hardest things you'll ever do is to build that taxonomy. Okay? So here's the cool part. Don't. Buy one. Or source it for free from APQC. Now, the reason why I mention APQC, American Process Quality Council, is Microsoft has worked with them, Microsoft Services, my group, has worked with them to create a whole bunch of different process taxonomies that they are now giving away for free. Why? So we don't have to create the process hierarchies either. It just makes everybody's life easier. So that's one of the reasons why I mentioned it in the slide. So it's really easy to get one. So this is a little examination of one segment of that. Now, I do want you to look at the wording, okay? And recognize that different companies will do this in different ways. A capability may be noun, verb, or verb, noun. In our context, at the time I created this model, it was verb, noun. Is that really different from a process hierarchy? Maybe not. Does it matter? Absolutely not. Because like I said, it's just a list of things that we're going to attach information to, because we're going to use it to drive improvement. So, capability hierarchy is a useful first step on the bottom part of that Y chain. But now, the interesting challenge is you don't show the whole hierarchy of capabilities to every business stakeholder. They don't care. Especially if your organization has more than one business model, and most of yours do. If I had a business capability hierarchy for my coffee shop that does meetings in a back room, some of my capabilities will be about getting businesses to come and tour and look at that space, that meeting space. Other capabilities will be about setup and preparation for a meeting. So let's say that you have an organization of these coffee shops with meeting rooms, and you've got one business leader who cares about the coffee and another business leader who cares about the meetings. So I'm talking to Joe Coffee now, okay? And I'm going to talk to Mary Meetings next week. So I'm talking to Joe Coffee. Am I going to show him the capability for for setting up for a meeting? He doesn't care. Don't show him the whole capability model. Have it. It's actually useful every now and then to flash it up on a PowerPoint slide or something and say, we've got this really great capability model, but I'm not going to show you the whole thing. And then switch over to the part they care about. So the diagram I showed you, that big capability model, was actually the subset. That is the small set for people who are involved in e-commerce, okay? But you only show the subset that's actually valuable to that customer. They're the ones that are going to waste their time looking at the whole thing. They'll go, why are you wasting my time asking me about capabilities that we don't do? You don't understand my business. Okay, you just demonstrated your ignorance. Get out of the room. So how do you create a capability model that's specific to the business that you're talking to if you haven't sat down with the business that you're talking to? You can't. Sit down with the business. You don't start with the guy at the top. He didn't have time to educate you on his business. Start with somebody that he trusts or someone who's business manager in that group who can give you enough information so that you can narrow that capability model down and make it valuable. And when you're presenting it to the high level, only show the gray boxes, only show the taxonomy level. You don't show the actual details. Okay, so building your capability model is getting something that's generic, making it specific to the business in general, and then narrow it down when you're talking to each one of the different stakeholders that you want to collect information from about their strategies. You're going to have to narrow it down to the piece of the business that they care about. Step 2 in capabilities, assess them. So now I've got a business model just for you. By the way, you're Joe Coffey for a minute. Is that all right with you? Okay, Joe Coffey. All right. Are you going to be Merry Meetings for me? You can be my Merry Meetings? Okay. So Joe Coffey, I'm going to talk to you about coffee now. And one of your capabilities is purchasing, isn't it? You got to buy the coffee. What if you don't? What if you have, love them. What if you have a problem where you're, some of the coffee you got last month, I love the microphone. It seems to be dipping in and out. Would you think that maybe you have something you want to address there? Okay. So if you have a capability of purchasing the good coffee, let's say it's your purchasing capability, okay, maybe you need to improve it. So I'm going to ask you about your list of capabilities. And one of your capabilities is purchasing the coffee. And you're going to tell me how important is it? How important is it that you purchase good coffee? If the CEO's getting the coffee? All right, but see, you're selling this stuff to the general public, right? All right, so it's your product. Okay, so if your customers are getting good coffee, is that important? Okay, so high importance, high, medium, low. Does the scale matter? High, medium, low, or 1 to 5, or 1 to 10? Does the scale matter? Nah, as long as you got more than a few. Okay, now, in this case, we've demonstrated that your company's had recent problems with getting good coffee. Maybe the supplier was unreliable, all right? Would you consider it to be a mature capability in your organization? Always getting the best coffee?
Not if you're getting bad coffee on occasion, you should do it.
So not if you're getting bad coffee on occasion. I would agree. So your maturity is low, but your importance is high. And that's what you're going to do. You're going to go talk to your business stakeholders and say, how mature is this particular capability and how important is this particular capability? Now that's useful information all by itself, even if you don't attach it to strategy. Your business will actually want to know and can immediately use that piece of information because the person who knows how important it is not the same as the person who knows how mature it is. And when you bring all that data together and you show it to both, the person who uses it and the person who understands it, one or both will go, I didn't know that. They'll point to some area that's of interest or concern and go, that's interesting. There's a gap between what's important and what we do well. Do we address it? Maybe. Not if it's not strategic. Okay? So the best way to do this really is with a questionnaire. The questionnaire will just list all your capabilities out and you'll sit and walk through it with them. All right? And the tool of choice, the tool from every business architect I've spoken with for this, people talk about, what is your tool for business modeling and capability modeling? How many want to guess what the tool is? Anybody guess? Excel, thank you. There's nothing special about that. It is the most commonly used business architecture tool. And then we're going to map the drivers to those capabilities. So this is that intersection point. So this is actually a piece of that same capability model with a little red and green and yellow dots. Why are they red and green and yellow? All right. We actually had a number of views on this very same model. Once you come up with a model that they understand, keep showing it to them over and over and over again. It becomes a metaphor for describing the business. It becomes a shorthand, a way of talking about the business. Okay? And in this case, in this particular one, the red dot said they are strategic and immature. Strategic and immature, which means go fix it. Now, if they are not strategic and they're immature, fine. If they're not strategic and they're mature, okay, that's cool. But if they're strategic but immature, hey, we got a problem. Strategic means I need this capability to perform well. Immature means it's not. If there's a gap between what you need and what you have, that's what you're looking for, and that's what business architects draw attention to, the gaps. So in this case, we'll come up with a capability model that will highlight the gaps, and then we'll roll it all up. And so at the gray box level, we'll have one dot, and that's the only thing I actually show to my business stakeholders. Business intelligence has a whole bunch of red dots, so I'm going to call it red. And we need to focus on business intelligence. And if they say why, I'll point to the person in their team who I spoke with who said business intelligence was important. And I'll say, Tom said that we use that information in order to target our marketing programs, in order to schedule the events. So, according to Tom, we need a better job there. We're not doing a very good job there, so we need to improve it. Did Tom ever specify that we needed to install SQL Server reporting services and that we needed to put an integration in it? Nah, Tom doesn't care. He just wants the reports. He wants the ability to find that data. You let IT deal with the actual solution. This is not solutioning yet. This is identifying the problem space. Here comes the fun part. As you're starting to put this together, you're going to realize that the gaps, those gaps are going to line up. They're going to line up to a strategy. They're going to line up to some success thing that the stakeholders want. Pull those pieces together. You might be missing a few. That's okay. Set them on the table for now. Pull the things together that come together in a story and tell a story. So I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling. Those of you who saw this session yesterday afternoon on business storytelling know what I'm talking about a little bit. Storytelling is not just a matter of presenting information, throwing it up onto the page, okay? Storytelling is a matter of bringing it together, making it personal. Every story has a hero and a villain. They may have supporting characters and a whole cast. The hero may go through a plot where they struggle and succeed and appear to have succeeded completely, but then there's a last-minute huge problem and they have to overcome it. Stories are memorable. So those of you who know Chip and Dan Heath, they wrote a book called Make It Stick, and another book called Switch. I recommend both books heartily. Chip and Dan Heath. Make It Stick, one of the things that he talks about, these two folks do seminars at Stanford University every year. And one of the seminars that they do, they get a bunch of students, it's probably about the right size of a room, there's one of these big theater rooms, and they'll get volunteers for about 5 different teams, 2 or 3 people each on these teams. So it's a small scattering of folks from the room. And he'll give each team a sheet of paper with some data on it, okay? And 20 minutes to come up with a presentation. And the goal is to make your data memorable. Make it stick. So by halfway through the seminar, then he'll get them all to stand up and do a 2-minute presentation on their data. 2 minutes. So 5 teams will go, one right after the other. I'm going to present beans. Somebody else, I'm going to talk about rice growing in China. Somebody else, and this is just whatever data was on the sheet of paper, and it may have nothing to do with whatever they've ever seen before. Somebody else is going to talk about a manufacturing process in Singapore. Somebody else is going to talk about banking in Germany. I don't care. After the 5 are done, they'll put up some music video or something just to kind of clear your brain so you don't remember anything. And then he hands out blank sheets of paper and says, write down as many facts as you can. You want to know what's cool? The people who walked up and told a story are far more memorable. Their facts are more memorable than the people who stood there and presented. So I'm standing here telling you a story about a seminar in Stanford University that makes facts memorable. I'm willing to bet that if I asked you tomorrow what story I told and whether it made facts memorable, you'd remember that telling stories makes things memorable. Pull your capabilities together into a story. Give it a hero, give it a villain, give it a timeline. Give them a need. Why do we need to address this particular problem now? You're retelling the story of the strategy itself, but you're telling it from the standpoint of characters, people that have to change, people that have to move. And what happens when you do that? You're building the motivation to make that change real. You have to build it first in the senior execs, because if they don't buy in, the rest is dead. Building it first in the senior execs, then you're going to build it in their managers, then you're going to build it in the workers who actually have to make these changes. You're going to have to understand all the details. But change management requires that everyone wants it first. Not everybody. Enough people want it first. You have to build the demand. You have to build awareness, then you have to build demand. So tell it in the form of a story. The heat map itself is very valuable for illustrating specific points. Those gaps. What are the capabilities that need investment? If I take my heat map and I can actually align the investments, and we did this, I can say how much money was spent against each of these capabilities in the last 3 years. And is it still mature? Right? And how much have we already planned to spend? Because often you're right in the middle of a planning cycle and, gee, there's a program and we're going to address these 9 capabilities. They haven't thought about it in that way. They just want to have a program. It's going to make things cool. How many of you have ever seen a business case that says, we're doing this because things will get cool? Yeah, maybe that's a Microsoft thing. There are business cases that'll be very emotional, right? So if you can come back and say, well, yeah, but we're spending $1 million to give you these 4 capabilities, so I'm just going to allocate that as $250,000 each on these 4 capabilities. And then you show it up on a slide that shows all the capabilities that need investment and all the capabilities that are getting investment. I guarantee you there's a gap. We have to spend on these 9, we're spending on these 14, and look at how much money we're spending on them, and 3 of them are already mature. At that point in time, people go, what? Without realizing they just shot down their own pet project. It's a little bit of jujitsu. But if someone says, I really understand now that what I'm spending money on is not what I should be spending money on, you've won. All you got to get is get them to think differently about where they're spending their money, and that's what alignment is. So you're looking for those capabilities that need investment, capabilities that are already funded. Gee, we're mature in this space, but we're spending a bunch of money. Well, we're mature in that space. Why are we spending a bunch of money? Do we need to? Is it strategic? Probably not. Let's cut some of the money we're spending over there and use it over here. Gaps in ownership. We really need that coffee purchasing thing to do better. Who's in charge? What if the answer is no one? Really? That's bad. What if the answer is both of you? That's worse. Once you have that story, you have to actually do the telling of it. You have to walk it around. You have to do, it's not all going to happen at once. You have to go and engage the leaders, and sometimes in order to engage the leaders, you have to engage the people that they trust first. So there's a lot of stakeholder management. If I'm going to get you to agree, I have to get this entire row of people who report to you or that you like or that you listen to agree. So I'm going to set up separate meetings with each one of you, but not you. I'm going to set up, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Sometimes there is a not you. Sometimes it's a matter of you've opposed me in the past. I don't want you to oppose me now. I know I'm not going to get you to agree with me. But if I can get you to neutral, then I'm successful because you're a great salesperson and you're going to tell him how good this idea is. Stakeholder management is often a matter of knowing who you have to influence. Create a diagram of that. By the way, I'm very visual. I diagram things. That's the architect's disease. Okay? So create a diagram of the people that you need to influence, who they connect with. It's not always direct reports. In fact, it's often not direct reports. You may very well trust one of your peers in another part of the business. You don't report to the same manager, but you go to golf together, okay? Or you go fishing. And you've listened to this person, they're smart, capable. So now I know that if I want to influence you, I better make sure that that person's on board too. Draw the diagram. Draw an influence diagram. Look it up, influence diagrams. These are an important part of building that buy-in, is getting the key leaders who care and the people that they trust to at least be aware, interested, and perhaps even driving toward your change, the changes that you're going to suggest, okay? What's in it for me? You know, that's the third bullet. It says each person must be able to see your solution meeting their needs. I could shorten that down to 5 words. What's in it for me? Okay, you need to know why you want to care. And why you care might be very different than why you care. I have to frame it both, for both of you. And if I'm doing it in the same meeting, that's kind of fun. If I'm doing it in different meetings, I can actually just tailor it right to you, right? I can actually say, here's why you care, and ignore the fact that he benefits. You know, I know you don't like him, but ignore that fact. As long as you benefit, right? What's in it for me is a big part of getting people to buy in. If they're going to buy in, they had to have contributed. This is a very important part of buy-in. So if I ask you what it is to make it that you're going to sign up, you're going to say, did my guys contribute? And if I say yes, in fact, I talked to every single person who you listened to, and they gave me ideas, and we changed what we were going to say specifically because of their terrific involvement. And what would you might maybe say? That sounds pretty good. I got my guys, and they care. If my guys are bought in, okay, I'll buy in. Because no manager actually does the work. By the way, if you think managers do the work, you haven't met any of the managers I work with. Buy-in is a process, it's not an event. It doesn't happen at one point in time, and you have to keep refreshing people's memory. You bought in, remember? Right? That's my short way of saying, we're referring back to your strategy that you told us many times. I'm going to couch it in 1,000 words. It'll sound like verbal diarrhea. But if you hear that your strategy is being connected to, and you hear that you care and that your people care, you'll keep supporting it. And that continued support is important. It's not a matter of a funding cycle. It's a matter of belief. It's a matter of getting your people to engage. It's a matter of making sure that all the people who need to be connected are connected. That people are willing to take time out of their busy schedule and talk to you about the maturity of their capability. It's very important on the key capabilities, the ones that are really part of your story, that you understand who the owner of that capability is. Who is the person that you have to get agreement to change it? If you like it, but you have to sign up, I need to know that you own it. And you can influence them. And set up the meeting, how's that? Okay, so you have to agree on the owner, you have to agree on the priority. And this comes from that mapping, as I mentioned before, connecting the strategic drivers to the capabilities themselves. That's where your priority comes from. And it comes from the connection between those strategies and those business models. Timing. Gee, can we do it all at once? Wouldn't that be fun? No. More importantly, sometimes there's a relationship between the two capabilities. I can improve one capability, but only after I've improved another. That's very important to understand. That might be because of information. That might be because of a team that is or is not in place yet. That might be because you're doing an acquisition and you have to wait for some period of time before you can use the capabilities of your company you've acquired. Clarify trade-offs. I've got 4 strategies and we're going to skip strategy number 3. Why? Well, because all 4 strategies hit the accounting department and we only have 6 people in the accounting department and we don't want to kill them. So we're going to skip strategy number 3 because it's very complicated. It's going to take a bunch of time. And honestly, if we can get strategy 1, 2, and 4 in place, we're going to increase our profitability to meet our goals. So let's drop strategy 3 from the list now, and we'll come back and do it in a year. Nothing wrong with that. Timing is important to understand the relationships and understand the conflicts and resources. It's a big part of business architecture. If you sell somebody a bad bill of goods, they won't trust you the next time. Now comes the fun part. So I call it demand management just because I like to stick it underneath a name that'll get people all upset. This step means, okay, everybody agrees we need to make the following 6 changes. But you want to know something? That's not all the 6 changes that need to be made. There's a whole bunch of changes that need to be made in an organization at any one time. And you're going to have to put them all into a pile and fund them and create a portfolio. Portfolio being a wonderful word we stole wholeheartedly from the financial business, and then we don't use it anything like financial people use it. Okay, because a portfolio in investment assumes that each one of those different elements in my portfolio are somewhat liquid and are somewhat comparable to one another. And that is absolutely not the case in a business initiative portfolio. But between buy-in and getting that portfolio in place, there's 3 different sources of those initiatives. You've got to create a huge pile of initiatives and weed it down, and you're going to have 3 different sources. Top down, bottom up, middle out. So I'm going to hit all 3 of those here in the next 3 slides. Top down, the stuff the strategy requires. Your senior exec is passionate and cares about making sure that Bing is the next great search engine. So I've got a couple of top-down strategies in order to improve the capabilities of Bing. Okay, that's top-down. I have to do that in order to make my CEO happy. And he's got his reasons for whatever they are, and I'm fine with that. At some level, I'm just going to go, yes, sir. Okay? But that's what top-down is. Bottom up, not so easily and straightforward. So drill down a couple of steps inside the organization. Let's say that your group buys coffee. I'm going to pick on my Mr. Coffee for a moment, okay? Your group buys coffee, okay? And you know that you need to improve that capability because you had a big brouhaha with bad coffee, okay? So you say, well, I need 3 different suppliers. But one of those suppliers requires a business partnership and wants me to invest in the supplier. Maybe you have to put money into that company in order to get them ready to be able to provide you with the level of quality and service that you need from them. You might trust them. You might actually be willing to do it. But that's a business initiative, and that's bottom up. So you suggest, let's put money into that supplier relationship. That might be money you're spending on your own organization. Maybe it's integration with their back-end purchasing system. It might be money you're spending on the relationship. Maybe you're going to set up an office that's near where their location is, or you have to pay for travel expenses to fly back and forth. Okay, maybe they're in Argentina. But that's money. That's money you're investing. Okay, so you're going to add that to the list of initiatives. Here's one of the things that I want in my portfolio. I want the company to spend $12,500 making sure that Partner Joe can provide me coffee when I need it. And that's an investment. Okay, that's bottom up. They're often cost or efficiency focused. Okay, a good example of a bottom up strategy is we need to cut the costs on this. I'm doing these things twice. 2 different groups are doing the same thing. How about if I just always use group A and group B can go off and be valuable in some other way? And so we're all going to, let's say we're all going to only buy coffee for all of our stores through one purchasing group. That's cost focused. Maybe it's more efficient to buy it through one group. Maybe it's not. But that's an initiative that you would throw in as a bottom up initiative. Okay? Doesn't mean it's not differentiated. Okay, bottom up initiatives are not wrong, they're not lesser. They're not unimportant. They can differentiate your product, they can save you money, they can increase your marketplace. These can be very important initiatives, but they're incremental. Okay? Middle out initiatives are often what I call the reuse initiatives. We do something well, but we don't do it over and over again. Okay, so there's an opportunity to reuse. Maybe we have a really solid purchasing department for coffee, and we have a terrible person who does the buying for the pastries. Why don't we use the same purchasing process that we use for the coffee to just use it for the pastries? Maybe that would work. That would be a middle out initiative. That's a way of saying, we do something well, let's do it well in other areas of the business. How do you find those things you do well? With that capability map that I showed you earlier. You find them by looking for those super mature things. Because if you find the areas where you're really mature, and then you go, how well are we using that maturity? How well are we using that strength? And if the answer is only one little narrow piece of the business uses that strength, you can, well, is that really a good investment? Maybe we can use it in other portions. So those 3 together come together to create your list of things that go into your portfolio. So now I'm going to assume the portfolio, actual selection of the portfolio, is a separate process outside of business architecture. Business architects will be very much involved, but they are a piece. At some level, it becomes political. At some level, it's emotional. It's an argument. I have, X millions to spend and 10 times that in demand. I understand every company and every organization is going to do that differently. But now let's say that you come up with a list of a portfolio of things that actually have been funded and are actually going to go forward, and maybe you've changed the scope along the way in order to make them fit within that budget and timeline. All right, super. Does business architecture step back? And does enterprise architecture step in? That's a good question, and I don't view this as job titles, by the way. I view these as roles. Same person can play both. But I do think that at this point in time, it needs to be the enterprise architecture role that provides the oversight, because they have to be able to play across multiple different ways of thinking. They have to be able to play across business process and information and systems and technologies. Anytime you ever had a meeting with an architect and you could tell that person was clueless? Have you ever had that happen? I have. You ever bullshitted them while they were there? Okay. This is why I need an enterprise architect. It's hard to bullshit an enterprise architect. Projects, once they get rolling, are not trains on a track that you just kind of start them off and off they go. It's definitely not a subway train. Okay? There's no tracks. So the metaphor I like to use is herds of cattle. Some people will say herds of cats, but I actually think that's almost derogatory. It's more like a herd of cattle. You really have to kind of keep pushing them in the right direction and just assume that some things will go crazy and sometimes there will be awful things happening. Oversight from an EA standpoint is not project management. It's not making sure they do things and deliver on a timely schedule. It's making sure that what they're building is the right thing to build. It's making sure that when the business comes back and says, I'm sorry, but you can't overrun your cost or your schedule like you've asked me to, deliver on December 1st and deliver for the amount of money that I said, and then, okay, we got to cut scope. All right, cut scope. What scope? Now the EA needs to get involved. Because if the scope they cut kills the value of the program from that strategic standpoint, problem. So the EA is involved in those decisions in governance. Are we cutting the right scope? Are we still able to deliver our value, right? If we're going to increase scope, are we increasing scope in a way that will benefit another program that's an important part of our strategy? That's also one of the key things that enterprise architects get involved in. And yes, you do have to be able to speak to technologists and to business people at the same time without crossing your teeth. It can be tough, okay? So really what you're trying to govern here is you're not trying to deliver the project on time. Your program manager can do that, your project manager can do that. They're great at it, let them, right? You're trying to make sure the right work is delivered, okay? So that's the talk. These are my generic slides here at the end. I'm going to put up the please review me slide and open up for questions.